Good evening, my fellow vampire lovers. The sun is going down, and you know what that means. It's time for me to record another episode of my podcast, The Beautiful Dead. As always, I'm your host, Lena Nazari. You can find me on Instagram at The Beautiful Dead Podcast, or go to lenanazari.com if you want to join my fanged family or know where I'm going to be. Speaking of which, when this video drops, I will be in the last day of Fan Expo Philly, which is one of my top 3 cons to go to. I love going to Philly. I love Fan Expo. Today is also the day that I will be doing my vampire panel, and Tony from Hack the Movies will be joining me at my table. And I also have an artifact, an actual vampire hunter's kit from the 1800s on loan from the Vampire Museum. So go check out Instagram to see all my shenanigans at Fan Expo Philly. I think this is my 4th year doing it, if I remember correctly. Hopefully all you guys have come and said hi to me, and anybody who will let me, I'll be posting on Instagram all the cool people I get to meet. My next appearance is going to be in July at GalaxyCon in New Orleans. You know how much I love New Orleans. And while I'm there, I'm hoping to start looking at some apartments. You guys, make sure you're following me so you get to see when I do finally move. Also, I know that I normally have a book out in May. This is my 5th book that I'm working on. All 4 books previously have come out every May. It's obviously not happening because we're middle of May, and I still haven't finished writing the book. And I'm sorry, guys, but life is just lifing at me right now. So the goal is to have it out for my birthday, which is the end of September. So please follow me on all the things so you can see when the books come out. And also please subscribe, like, share, all that stuff. It really does mean so much to me. Every time I get a new subscriber, guys, I cannot tell you. When I see a comment on my video, it just does so much for my soul. And considering how things are right now, like, I need every piece of joy in my life. So just know that I appreciate every single one of you. Okay, so I inadvertently created a theme. I did not mean to. So obviously, beginning of May, I covered Sinners because my social media was blowing up about it. And then I already had Vamp U planned, and I realized I had a theme, which was identical relatives, whether it be twins, ancestors, whatever. So I tracked down 2 more vampire movies that had either identical relatives, ancestors, or actual twins, and that is our theme for May. So I found The Vampire Happening from 1971. It had popped up for me before. And again, I did not intend to do this theme, but it just worked out perfectly. So I will be shocked if anybody has actually seen this movie. So I'm just going to let you know, if you're not familiar with what I do, massive spoiler alerts, because I talk about the movie from the beginning to the end, and we break down the vampire world. So if you haven't seen it and you're intrigued, I would pause this video, go watch it on Amazon Prime, and then come back. But this is one of those movies that I feel like you can listen to me talk about, and still you're going to want to go watch it, because it really is. It is something. It is something. So I wanted to do some kind of 70s vibe with my outfit, but I don't have anything. I am utterly boring. I have scrubs, workout clothes, and then black stuff. So I just picked a black top and a choker, but you get what I'm trying to do here. I was trying to go for a 70s look. I should have ironed my hair. No, I'm not going to do that. All right, guys, let's dive in. Let's talk about The Vampire Happening from 1971. We open on a man and woman who are getting to know each other in bed, if you know what I'm talking about. And then we realize about 30 seconds in that as they pull back, it's actually a movie being played on a plane, an airplane of all things. And then they type on the screen and let us know that the plane is landing in Transylvania and it's 1971. A glamorous woman in a fur coat deplanes and is escorted to a very nice car when one of the attendants asks for her autograph. And this is when we find out that she is a very famous actress and her name is Betty. And then it dissolves, and then we get some very groovy music and some opening credits complete with cartoon vampires, and the artwork reminds me of like a Scooby-Doo episode, a classic Scooby-Doo episode. And I was like, oh, I paused. I got a little snack. I was like, oh, this is going to be a ride. And I am so ready. The movie begins with the fancy car that she is in driving up to this castle, and Betty gets out to explore the castle. When she reaches the door, an old man opens the door and is absolutely terrified to see this woman. And he keeps mumbling, "How can you be out? The sun is out. You should be in your coffin." And she's kind of confused, but she's treating him almost like he's senile. And she explains she's just arrived from the US. She has no idea what he's babbling about, and she has essentially inherited this castle from her great uncle who has just passed away. She's here to see the place and decide what she wants to do with it. He calms down and starts to show her the castle. She asks, "Why were you so scared when you first saw me?" So he leads her to a portrait of a woman who is identical to her, but has long dark hair. So she is a blonde, and the person in the portrait who is identical to her has long dark hair. This woman's name was Clara Mundy, and that is Betty's great-great-grandmother. Her great-great-grandfather brought this woman over from Italy and married her despite family objections because she was a dancer, and the whole village said that she was a witch. They claim that the painter of the portrait was her lover, and that when she got tired of him, he threw himself off the bell tower. She went through men and devoured every one of them, according to this old butler, who we find out is named Joseph. Then one morning, Clara Mundy is found dead amongst her tumbled sheets and naked with 2 teeth marks on her neck. It was reported that she was bitten by a rabid fox, but everyone says she is now a vampire. Next, we see in the castle, part of the tour, Joseph takes us to a torture chamber, and then we get flashbacks of these well-endowed naked women being tortured on the rack, and then there's a flight attendant being pressed and a naked woman being hung upside down. And amongst these visions that Betty is having, Clara Mundy is walking and smiling. So I don't know if they're trying to like show us that somehow Betty is connected to Clara Mundy in some way. Or maybe I was reading too much into that. I'll just tell you, spoiler alert, as I watched the whole movie, and now that I go back and read this part, I was reading way too much into it. I think it was just a way to show gratuitous torture and nudity. It's gratuitous nudity. The torture was very light. Next, we see the coffin room, where all of her ancestors lay in these big stone coffins. And she asks Joseph for the keys to the coffins, and he hesitates, but he has to hand them over because she's the new Baroness. And he basically says, like, "I really hope you will just let the dead lie." That's actually a very good lesson for all of you out there. Just leave the dead alone. That night, Betty's having a nightmare. In the nightmare, she's lured into a party in the castle and is served a dish that looks a lot like boobs. Then a man is hung by a noose in front of her. She wakes to Joseph serving her breakfast. Breasts are now on my mind. They would be for you too if you watch this movie. Serving her breakfast, she looks at the window to see that her neighbor, the neighboring building, is a monastery. A monk is studying and looks up to her window, and she flashes her boobs, and he like freaks out and runs away. And then she asks for a bath, and I'm like, why would you do that? That is so effed up. I'm like, are we supposed to like? I don't understand the purpose of that. And even now that I finished the movie, I still don't understand the purpose of that. So she's taking a bath. Oh my. The monk that she just flashed, who we find out his name is Martin, is walking through the woods. He's clearly very affected. He's trying to calm himself down. But now everywhere he looks, he's seeing boobs and everything looks very sexual. So he starts to pray and he thinks he's good. But then he sees a woman come out from behind a tree and it's Betty, but now she has a black wig on. So we find out throughout the course of the film that Betty, I guess because she's an actress, has so many wigs. So she's now out there wearing a black wig and he thinks he must be hallucinating, but then he realizes he's not, and she is the new neighbor, the new Baroness, and she invites him to the castle that night to come see the chapel within the ruins and tells him, bring a red rose. Meanwhile, later that afternoon, Betty unlocks Clara Mundy's coffin to see that she is fully intact. She is absolutely beautiful and she is breathing. So this is our first vampire pause because we do find out throughout the course of the film that the vampires do breathe. The movement of her chest scares Betty away. So Betty runs, but she leaves the lid unlocked and open. Clara Mundy stands and climbs out of the coffin. We see that she has two sharp fangs that appear to be always present. And we can assume that she was basically just existing as a vampire locked in this coffin. So now we know they have two sharp canines. The canines are always there. They're not retractable. And that they can just exist for however long she was in this coffin. So clearly they can't starve to death. They don't wither if they don't get blood. They just kind of lay there. One of the things they did in this movie that helped a lot, because Clara Mundy and Betty are played by the same actress, and they constantly are changing wigs, so it's very hard to tell who's who. Clara Mundy has black nails, Betty has red nails, and Clara Mundy is always wearing this long silver chain that has a red rose, and that kind of helps us differentiate who is who. It took me a little while to pick up on that, but finally I did, and I was like, because it was getting very confusing very quickly. That night, Martin sneaks out of the monastery with his red rose and heads to the castle as Betty is getting ready for this monk to come over. She's like creating a whole nice table with candles. I don't know what her intention is. Maybe she's super horned up and she hasn't had it in a while and the monk looks good enough. Clara Mundy is exploring the castle to see what's new. She loves the new bathtub and she goes through Betty's clothes. Betty is looking for something to read while she waits, and she chooses the book Dracula. When Martin the monk arrives, but instead of Betty, Clara Mundy finds him first. And since they look so much alike, Martin doesn't know the difference, and so he lets the vampire lead him into a back room. A few minutes later, Betty comes down and asks Joseph if the monk has arrived, and he said, yes, didn't you just meet up with him? At that time, we see that Martin is Clara Mundy's first meal as she bites into his neck and drinks his blood. Joseph has a wooden stake because very quickly he has figured out that Betty probably unlocked the coffin and that Clara Mundy is back because she looks exactly like Betty. He's realizing now that they might be in big trouble. So he has this giant wooden stake. And he leads Betty down to the coffin room, chastising her for opening the coffin, ready to stake the vampire, but when they open the coffin, she is gone. He says, get a silver cross and garlic.
Can help us is a silver cross and plenty of garlic. You can't have too much garlic. Let's go.
So we know those two things work, garlic and silver crosses. I don't know if it has to be a silver cross, but we know the cross will work. And Betty says, next time you'll be telling us that Dracula will be joining us. And they leave the room. And then Clara Mundy comes in and says, oh, my old flame will join us soon enough.
The next thing you'll tell me is that Dracula will be joining us. Silly girl. My old flame will be joining us soon. Oh.
Implying that she dated Dracula. So in this world, Dracula is a real thing and Clara Mundy dated him. Okay. Joseph and Betty find the dead monk in a back room and dispose of his body out in a field, and Betty is still insisting that vampires do not exist. The next day, there's a funeral for Monk Martin, and the priest who's completing the ceremony explains that Martin was killed by a rabid fox. Betty's at the funeral, and it starts to rain. And also at the funeral, we find out that adjoining the property, there's her castle, there's a monastery, and then there's a girls' boarding school. And all the girls have come down for the funeral. And with them is their very handsome teacher, Jens. And it starts pouring rain, so everybody starts running around. And this handsome man, Jens, throws his coat over Betty to protect her, and she offers to drive him to her castle for tea, which he accepts. Once there, she goes to slip into something more comfortable. She puts on a dark wig, and poor Joseph thinks she's the vampire.
I am. I really am. I always feel better without all the female gear. Joseph, what are you doing?
Excuse me.
So when he comes in with a tray of tea, he like spills it all over the teacher because he's so freaked out. And Betty sends him away and then tells the stranger, strip down to your boxers so we can wash your clothes. And he does. And then they head to the bedroom.
You're quite strong.
That's it. He strips down, they go right to the bedroom. Meanwhile, Joseph wants to be certain, so he goes down to the coffin room. Clara Mundy is in her coffin, and so he decides to nail the coffin lid down, and then in the middle of the night, he takes the coffin out on a rowboat and drops it into the lake to sink it down to the ground. Betty and Jens are now post-coital, and they're looking through the Dracula book and learning that vampires need to be in their coffin before dawn. That's an old one. They can be killed by a wooden stake, but of course they laugh about how silly it is and how vampires don't exist, and they just throw the book aside. The next morning, Jens heads to work as a teacher at the girls' school, like I told you, and Betty is like,
Bye, darling. See you tonight.
Bye, sweetheart.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
like they've been together for 5 years. You just met him 12 hours ago. Why are you calling him darling, and what is happening right now? At the school, two girls are gossiping about how their handsome teacher left with the new Baroness and how they probably did it. The same two girls are sent out of class for gossiping and back up to their dorm room, where they meet up with their boyfriends and immediately get naked, and they all start hooking up in the same bed, which is a choice. That's fine. I'm not judging. I'm just like, this movie feels like it is on fast forward, or like a lot of stuff was edited out. At the monastery, another monk, who we find out is the abbot, is studying, and he hears a ruckus outside, so he looks out the window to see the two boys climbing out of the dorm bedroom window from the boarding school, and he pulls a telescope out to spy, and the two topless girls are in the window, and he's like getting all excited, and then the school marm shows up in the window, scares the girls away, and the monk calls her a very not nice word for a lesbian.
Ze ought to ship that dyke back to Holland.
And I was like, oh, 1970s. At the castle, Betty is trying to convince Joseph that Monk Martin died of a heart attack, not of a vampire attack. Meanwhile, we see that Clara Mundy was actually sleeping in her ancestor's coffin, so she was never thrown into the lake.
Clever girl.
She is up, she is hungry, but Joseph has hung garlic above his bed, and he's sleeping with a knife in his hand because he knows what's up, and he is not going to be gaslit. So he got cloves of garlic everywhere. He's got a silver dagger in his hand. Clara Mundy comes in, but she sees the garlic and she kind of hisses at it, which wakes Joseph up, who screams at her to get back in her coffin. We now see Monk Martin climbing out of the grave, and he has fangs, and he is so happy, which makes me think that boy never wanted to be a monk. That was not his choice, because he is the happiest vampire I've ever seen in a vampire film, and that's saying something. Nearby, a man and woman are on a nighttime romantic walk. The boy walks the girl back to her home, which is the girl's boarding school. She climbs in through the window, and then the boy leaves, and Martin follows. And we see him climbing through that window, and he is bare-assed, and then he comments that he's freezing. So, this is why I mentioned this, vampire pause. So this is what we know. All it takes is a bite. I don't even know that you need to be drained. You rise the next night. The fangs are present all the time, and we know that you can feel cold. So most of our vampires are impervious to the cold. But I guess in this universe, you can feel cold. You lust for blood. You don't need invited in, because we just saw Martin climb right through somebody's window. Garlic does repel vampires, but we see them around crosses. So even though there was a comment about crosses, we see them around crosses all the time, and they never react. So I don't think that's a thing. All right. So Martin climbs through the window. He bites one of the girls and feeds off the girls very briefly. I'm talking like 2 gulps. So I guess the vampires don't really need that much. Clara Mundy steals one of Betty's dresses and her blonde wig and enters the monastery and then attacks the abbot. Martin, who is so happy to be a vampire, is literally skipping through the cemetery and like singing, and returns to his coffin, and he is so happy. The man was born to be a vampire. Clara Mundy returns to the castle, and Joseph thinks it's Betty. Betty and Jens return from a date, and Joseph is very confused because now he realizes one of them is Clara Mundy and one of them is Betty, and he does not know which one is which, and he is very upset. So he runs, he finds a coat of armor, and he puts on the helmet to protect his neck so that he can't be bit, and then he starts trying to figure out who is who. Betty draws a bath, and Jens is making them drinks when Clara Mundy comes down pretending to be Betty, and she's about to bite his neck, but she kind of likes the way that he's like rubbing her back and kind of rubbing up on her, and then she realizes, oh, maybe I don't want to bite him yet. She makes a comment about how it's been 100 years and then leads him to the bedroom. So Joseph is watching all this go down, and he's like, that has to be Betty, because if it was Clara Mundy, she would be drinking by now. She'd be killing and drinking. So the girl up in the bath has to be Clara Mundy. Clara Mundy takes Jens to bed. They make love while Joseph runs for Betty with a stake that is the size of a fence post. I don't know where he got the stake, but it is like comically large. Betty laughs when she sees him and just thinks he's like silly and senile and superstitious. Clara Mundy leaves Jens just as Betty walks in, and she starts to make the moves on her man because she's just had a bath. She's clean. They probably had a little to drink while they were out. She climbs into bed. She starts making the moves, and he's like, whoa, 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 give a man a minute. But she is insistent, so he rallies. Joseph is in the basement, and Clara Mundy attacks, but she can't bite him because he's got the helmet on. So she backs off. He rushes her with the stake. She moves out of the way. He falls into a coffin, and then she pulls back on like a tall candle stand, and it releases the bottom of the coffin, and he falls down to we don't know where. We just hear the shout and him falling. The next morning, Jens is leaving for work, probably exhausted because the man has just pleased 2 women in one night back to back, and he hears Joseph crying out for help. So he finds Joseph at the bottom of a well, so he pulls him up with the bucket. This old man will not give up. He's been in a well all night. He comes up ready to fight, and he's telling Jens, the lady with the rose necklace is not Betty. That is Clara Mundy, who is a vampire. And Jens is like, you know what? She was kind of acting different. And she did mention how it's been 100 years since she had sex, which I thought was weird, but she can't be a vampire, right? Like, you have to be crazy. This can't be the truth. However, Joseph gets him down to the coffin room, and they open Clara Mundy's coffin. And he's like, see, I told you. And Jen says, but she's breathing. And he can't do it. He can't stake her. So he says, I'll tell you what, I'm going to sit here by this coffin until sundown. And if she wakes, I'll talk to her because she didn't kill me last night, so she must be reasonable. I'm going to talk to her. Lock the door so no one can get in, and then we'll see what happens at sundown. And she tells Joseph, please don't tell Betty. I'm supposed to go out with her tonight. Tell her I can't. Don't tell her what I'm doing. And then Joseph reluctantly agrees. Betty thinks she's being stood up, and she is pissed. And she reveals that she's been invited to a big party at someone else's castle, and that she was going to surprise Jens and take him to this big costume party. But because he's standing her up, she's going to go by herself. We find out the party is a costume ball being led by a count and countess. And my prediction at that moment was, it's going to be a vampire party. It's going to be full of vampires, and she's going to be walking in unknowingly into a vampire party. Okay. So, Betty decides that for this costume party, she's going to dress as her great-great-grandmother, Clara Mundy. So she puts on a long black wig and a red dress, and she heads to the party. Meanwhile, Clara Mundy rises and sees Jensen is asleep. Jensen. I got Supernatural on the brain. Jensen's always on my mind. No, Jens was sound asleep on the ground. And I'm like, man, sir, you had one job. Your job was to stay awake and make sure that vampire doesn't kill the people that you care about. And you couldn't just do that. So she gets down. She's like talking to him in his face, and he's passed out. Again, he did please 2 women the night before and probably didn't sleep. But also, like, it would wake me up if someone was talking to my face, especially if I knew that a vampire might be nearby. Actually, if I knew a vampire was nearby, I might be like, oh no, don't bite me. I don't know. Anywho, so she slips out. We don't know how, because the door is supposed to be locked. But also, this was her castle, so she probably knows every back door, everything. So she's going to go to the same masquerade ball, and she dresses as Betty in a blonde wig and a white dress that she steals from her great-granddaughter's trunk or whatever. She runs out. She climbs into Betty's car trunk, so Betty unwillingly drives the vampire to the party. Joseph wakes up Jens, who realizes that he majorly fucked up because the coffin is empty. And Joseph tells Jens about the party, and they determine Betty is in danger and they have to go to the party, which is now in full swing. And in attendance is Monk Martin, the abbot, who is now a vampire. We see, in fact, that the whole party is full of vampires, and you can tell because they've got like white makeup, fangs. I was like, this is exactly what I thought was going to be happening. And I'm not even mad about it. I was so here for it, okay? Arriving to the party in a helicopter is Dracula, and he is given an eyeball bouquet by Rosemary's Baby. The jokes are so on point. The party is serving all different types of blood. They even say that they have like ox blood, which is knowing how expensive ox meat is. Like I've seen like bison burgers and ox burgers and stuff. That's probably like a higher tier. That's probably like a top shelf, right? So like when you look at the liquors at a bar, with the blood, it's probably like humans at the top, like virgin blood at the top, you know, human already been tested, disease-free, drug-free, alcohol-free, that's all at the top. Then probably the next row is probably like ox, like endangered species, and you probably work all the way down, right, to like pig. Tell me if you think I'm wrong. I wish I could draw. If anyone can draw, please draw this for me, okay? So we know that they can drink animal blood, right? Both girls and Joseph and Jens, everybody has all arrived now all at the same time. So all the things we've seen throughout this movie have all now converged onto this party. Betty thinks all the people are in a costume. That's why they all have fangs. Clara Mundy finds Dracula and he says, "Didn't I just see you with black hair?" And she says, "No, that wasn't me." He is eating a banana. So we know that the vampires can eat food if they want. And then he confronts her and is like, did I hear that you're having sex with humans? Like,
word has reached me that you've been indulging in sex. The worst kind of sex. Human sex. What do you say about that?
Well, it's a hell of a lot better than blood sucking.
the vampire gossip spreads so fast in this world, okay? And he was like disgusted that she would be hooking up with a human. And she says to him, her old beau, she's like, yeah, and you know what? It's better than blood drinking. Nice, Clara Mundy. Own it. I love it. Jens and Joseph find costumes and dress as musketeers, and they're trying to find Betty to get her out, and Jens has an idea. So he tells Joseph, go up to the mechanics for the clock tower and turn the time back so that it won't chime and alert the vampires to the sunrise. And then they'll just party until the sun comes up and they'll all be wiped out. And I was like, that's actually really smart. Honestly, that was super smart. And Joseph's like, okay. So he runs up to do it and he does it. And he doesn't just turn it back, he just turns it off. Dracula is led to a back bedroom that has 4 sexy blondes in it. And the party host is like, you think I forgot about your birthday? Bro, this is your birthday gift. Enjoy. And Dracula's like, okay. He climbs in between these 4 blondes, and then he like gets out a horn and like blows this like weird, like German, like shepherd's horn. I was like, okay.
Let us play.
Jens finds Clara Mundy and thinks it's Betty, and she leads him into a bedroom and then admits who she is, and because of that, he like passes out. Jens, not very useful in a horror movie situation. That's all I gotta say. Joseph is the guy I'd be turning to. I'm like, all right, Joe, what are we gonna do? Because Jens falls asleep, passes out, like can't tell the difference between me and my great-great-grandma. Useless. Some vampires pull Betty into a room, and it's this big orgy is going down. And so the female vampire that pulls her in like starts hitting on her, and Betty's not into it. And so the female vampire is like, wait a second. Not only would Clara Mundy not say no, we'd already be naked because she swings all the ways. And so that raises suspicions. And so the female vampire realizes Betty doesn't have fangs. She stands up and announces to the room full of vampires, that's not Clara Mundy, that's a human. So Betty runs out, locks the door. Clara Mundy grabs her, pulls her into a room, and says, we need to trade clothes to get you out of here. Your family, I can't watch you get hurt. She leaves the room to return to the party and show the vampires in the orgy room, yes, I am Clara Mundy, and how dare you talk to me like that. Maybe I just wasn't into you. Meanwhile, Betty is trying to figure out how to get her man out of there safely. Joseph finds Clara Mundy and leads her out of the party to the car and gets her in the car thinking it's Betty because now they've changed clothes. Jens comes to and he thinks Betty is Clara Mundy, so he jumps up, runs out, locks her in, finds Joseph, who has returned to the castle to try and find him. It's 5 a.m. and they're like, okay, we need to get Betty home and get out of here before these vampires start to burn. Martin is outside using his fangs to pop all the car tires. I'm not totally sure why he's doing that. Maybe he decided that he wanted to be the only vampire. I don't know. But Martin's out there. He's using his fangs to like pop car tires. The abbot is out there too. So Joseph and Jens offer to drive these 2 men home, even though they know they're vampires. And I think it's because they're men of God, and I don't know. Maybe they were raised Catholic and they just can't leave 2 monks there. I have no idea. So they decide they're going to take the monks back to the monastery and then get Betty home safely. So they take the monks back to the monastery, let them out, and they like get out of the car to walk them to so they walk the abbot up to the door, and then they go to walk Martin into the cemetery. And while they're doing that, Clara Mundy steals the car. So Jensen, oh my God, Jens and Joseph are now having to walk back to the castle. Martin is in the cemetery drunk. So we know that the vampires in this universe can get inebriated. And he's trying to find his grave as the sun is coming up. Meanwhile, the abbot is pounding to be let into the monastery, but the other monks are on to him because he clearly has fangs and he's also intoxicated, so they're not letting him in. We go back to the castle where everybody realizes the sun is coming up and that the clock tower stopped. The clock stopped and they are in big trouble. So they all start running out of the castle screaming. Dracula gets into his helicopter and it takes off and everybody has scattered, and Betty like gets herself out and is just like stumbling out of the castle like, what is happening? What is going on? And she now has to hoof it back to her castle. Meanwhile, the boys decide... Meanwhile, I lost track. I was trying to do it from my own memory. Meanwhile, they get back to the castle and they see Betty laying in the coffin. And they're like, oh no, she got turned at the party and now she's a vampire. So they pull out the stake and they have it out of her chest and they think about staking her, but then they decided they can't kill her. They're going to ship her home to Hollywood where she'll be enshrined and adored as a dead actress. You know, they'll like, I don't know if the plan is like lock her in a glass coffin. I don't know what their plan is, but they literally say, we're going to ship her back to Hollywood. She'll be enshrined and she'll be worshipped. They load this coffin into a crate, and then we see the crate being loaded onto a plane. Jens and Joseph are at the airport at, you know, the big glass windows, watching this plane take off with what they think is Betty in it, but it's Clara Mundy. And then they look very sad. They start to walk away. And as they're coming down the stairs, in runs Betty, and they all start laughing and crying, and they're all so happy, and they all hug each other, and they all walk out, not putting it all together that they just sent Clara Mundy to Hollywood. So we see the plane land. We see all these screaming fans who have like big signs that are like, Betty, we love you. Betty, we missed you. And the plane opens and Clara Mundy comes down and people are like handing her roses and stuff. So we assume she got out of the crate, probably killed everybody except the pilot. And now she's in Hollywood. Everybody thinks that she's this famous actress, Betty, and she's now going to live the good life in Hollywood. And Betty, I guess, is back in Transylvania. And I'm just like, huh. And that's it. It just ends. It just ended. Like, we got no resolution at all. So, let me drink another thing of water and then let's talk about it. All right. Tropes I love and tropes I hate. You guys know I do not like one bite is all it takes. I don't like it. I like a good, romantic, passionate, intentional embrace. I don't like the one bite is all it takes, and mostly because I think about the logistics of it, and I think, well, every time a vampire bites somebody, they now have to behead them, stake them, all that to make sure they don't rise, or you end up with like just way too many vampires. It's going to be like a Daybreaker situation where everybody's a vampire and there's no one to feed from. But I understand why they used it here. Because they needed to add characters quickly. I do understand why they did it. I just don't like one bite is all it takes. I love vampire parties. I've said this before. I love vampire events, vampire bars, vampire clubs. I love a vampire party. In my opinion, the best one ever was from Van Helsing with Mr. Hugh Jackman. That vampire masquerade, I'm so here for it. I really, really, really wish I would get invited to like a vampire rave, whatever. I also love when the ancient ancestor looks exactly like you trope. I love that. I love the idea that like somewhere down the line is this ancestor that looks exactly like fill in the blank. Obviously, we see that in so many vampire things. We saw it in Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, where Mina looked exactly like his long-lost wife. We see it in so many things. Oh, and also, this is not necessarily vampire related, but it made me think of it as I was watching it. I love the you just inherited an ancient castle trope or an ancient manor trope. It made me think of Castle Freak. If you haven't seen Castle Freak, go watch it right now. It's from the 90s. It has Jeffrey Combs. It's Full Moon, the people that did Subspecies. But I love the idea that, like, one day you find out that you inherited a castle. Love that. On the list of things I wish would happen to me. All right. So I did not do ratings. I don't know why. I think I probably just forgot to. So maybe we'll do them off the top of my head so you can hear my thought process. How scary or evil are the vampires of the Vampire Happening from 1971? So first I'll tell you, I'm not totally sure if or how the vampires die in this world, because it's mentioned a stake to the heart, but not a single vampire dies in this whole thing. So I don't know. For all I know, they don't die. I think it's probably very easy for them to live because there's so many of them and they have these intricate networks. One bite is all it takes, so they spread pretty quickly. That being said, they just didn't feel very evil to me. Clara Mundy didn't want to hurt her ancestor. You know, there's a lot of like, it's very whimsical and silly and cheesy and goofy, and so none of them felt particularly scary. Now, they do need to feed off blood, so we got to give them that. And there is a lot of them, you know, and we got to give them that. But they can't hide very well amongst humans because they have fangs out all the time and they're very pale. So I would give them like, I don't know, a 3 out of 10 for scariness and evil. They're not that scary. They're not that evil. That being said, they are above us on the food chain, so you got to give them that. How sexy or alluring are the vampires of the Vampire Happening? These are some horny vampires, and they will have sex with you, and they have orgies, and they, you know, obviously are very fluid sexually. The only thing I will say is that they're not more alluring. So it's not like Martin got turned into a vampire and suddenly women were falling at his feet. He's still a goofy bastard, but they are very sexual. So, I mean, some of them are old, some of them are young, some of them are big, some of them are small. So they're not necessarily like, they're not like True Blood level vampires, but I'd give them a solid 6 out of 10 onks for sexiness and allure. So that was me doing the ratings off the cuff. That felt pretty good. If you disagree with me, go ahead and let me know. I don't mind. So again, this is one of those ones that was suggested to me on Prime. I threw it on my watch list and then just turned it on one night to see what it was all about. And I didn't necessarily have very high hopes for it. I think it probably was just suggested to me because I watched so many Hammer horrors there for a while, and it's sort of that same time period and that same vein, you know, same vein. See what I did there? Lots of boobies, but I watched it and then I immediately ordered it on DVD. So if you see snippets throughout this review, it's because I ordered it on DVD. I am telling you right now, I cannot wait for some night when I'm hanging out with my friends, we've had some edibles, I'm gonna put this thing on and now I'm gonna get to really just enjoy the ride because I don't have to pause it and write things down the whole time. I will absolutely be watching this again, and I'll tell you why. I am such a fan of farcical comedies. So if you're not familiar with farce is a story that is comedically timed in a way where there's a lot of mistaken identity, false understanding of what's going on. It's usually one person leaves, one person enters. So I'm sure you've seen something like that. It's very quick paced, it's very witty, it's very fast. A lot of like mistaken things going on. That is farce. And so to find this farcical comedy that was also a vampire film, that was also like from the 70s. So there was this like groovy soundtrack. It opened with cartoons, for goodness sakes. There was boobies everywhere. It was so silly that it was almost perfect. The word, if you made me to pick one word to describe this movie, I would say zany. It was zany and it was so much fun. If I had a ton of money, I would absolutely produce a remake of this movie now and do it very similarly, but just with the stuff that we have now, with, you know, the resources we have now. Would you guys be in it with me? Would you? If you've made it this far, please put groovy in the comments, because it was groovy, it was fun, and I would also like to personally thank everybody who made it all the way to the end. So put groovy in the comments, let me know you made it to the end. So originally on my list was to do humanist vampires seeking consenting suicidal person, because it has been recommended to me so many times. But I did want to keep with the whole like identical relatives thing. So next week, which is the end of May, we'll be doing Twins of Evil with actual twins, not one person playing both, but actual twins. And we'll be doing Twins of Evil, which is a Hammer horror with Peter Cushing. I'm very excited to talk about it. And then I'll push the other one maybe into June. But you guys, let me know, what do you want me to cover? And make sure you go out to Instagram and see what I've been doing at Fan Expo Philly, and maybe put it on your list for next year. All right, guys, I wish you wicked hugs and bloody kisses. Good evening.
And big finish. Thank you.